Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question. Not in an attempt to provide a universal answer, but to help you find and define your own answer to this question. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience. On the 9th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm joined by Jonny Camara. In this episode, Jonny takes us through his journey of growing up in Belfast to an Irish mother and a Senegalese father, from repressing parts of himself to reclaiming them, from pain and suffering to creativity and connection, and ultimately finding the trust and courage to fully being himself and understanding what matters in life and what he wants from life. Jonny is a leadership development strategist and coach, whose path of suffering, self-inquiry and alignment is also serving as inspiration to his burgeoning acting and screenwriting endeavours. Jonny's journey of suffering and pain leading to creativity and understanding and greater understanding of oneself is quite a typical journey of what I observed in all the interviews that I've conducted to date, and one that I find very inspiring. So I took a lot from it, and I'm sure you will too. And if you enjoy this conversation, please like, share and subscribe, as I greatly appreciate any support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 9th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. So Jonny, I'm very happy to have you here today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Thank you very much for taking part. The first question I have for you, sir, is there a question that you're trying to answer as you move through life?
That's a good question, to be honest. And you do ask good questions, Mark. Met you for coffee and I was like, this guy's going to make me think.
Sorry.
I think, thank you for that. I think the question that I'm trying to answer right now, is what does a life look like when you nourish sort of all different parts of yourself? Like, one thing that I'm sort of wrestling with is this convention that we sort of have to be one thing, or even earn money in one way. So we have to be one way in this world. Now, I know we don't have to earn money from every single way of being, but my question is, how can one make a living through using all of one's talents as opposed to one specific one? So that's a kind of question that I'm exploring right now, just through, exploring my different talents. I'm a coach, I'm a leadership development strategist, but I'm also stepping into writing, I'm stepping into acting as well. And I'm seeing what I learn about myself through that path too.
Just when you say this nourishing different parts of your life, what is this kind of writing and acting part bringing up for you?
So I think the writing and acting part is something that has come from a certain degree of, or a certain longer period of self-reflection, like introspection. Remember, I was going through a bit of a tough period coming off when I moved to Berlin, and I really wasn't sure what I was doing. And it took me a lot of time to kind of look inwards and see, okay, what are the things that I really like to do? What are the things that give me energy? And I realized that was all about connecting with people, play and creating. And then when I thought about those things that gave me energy, I thought, okay, what involves that? Those three things. And then I ended up coming to this long list of things that I could try out. And I tried out acting. I started creating little comedy skits. Some people who I know may have seen one. I think you've seen one as well on my
I
thought
LinkedIn. It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so that just came from a place where I just said, what if I started writing a comedy skit? What if I started filming one? And I felt really, I was filming it actually in this room, and my partner was in the other room, and it was I think she was on a call as well. So she was like, what on earth is going on here? I was making all the noise in this room. But yeah, just a series of what if questions. And then that kind of started, sort of gave me permission to explore a different part of myself. And lo and behold, kind of acting came to me, I guess.
This is interesting, right? And it kind of even ties into, I guess, my experience of even just starting a podcast and seeing where it goes, and kind of just almost allowing yourself permission to go do what you want to do without potentially caring so much as to either what convention or other people might say.
Right.
What and the skit that you're referring to, you play multiple different characters, so I can only imagine what your what your missus was thinking in the next room. But like, what's it been like? What you said it came apart. Like, you don't think that it's kind of detached from the fact that it was after a kind of a process of introspection.
Hmm.
What do you think shifted that allowed yourself to give yourself the permission to start being playful or being creative at this stage in your life?
I think it was suffering. I think it was really just some deep sense within me that the way I was living my life there wasn't fulfilling me. There was a sort of search for more meaning and something that something that wasn't being fulfilled in my current work, and I didn't know what that was. And I think it got to the point where I felt like I could only be this one thing. I could only be this one way, and then that to me felt very like asphyxiating, quite suffocating. And then I started to suffer from that. I was quite down. I was pretty depressed, and it was really just through that period of like understanding that something has to shift, and ultimately I'm gonna have to be the one to do it. That really kind of then allowed me to give me the energy to push through and try to do something different, basically, I think.
Man, it's so interesting, and I think for a number of people that I interviewed, both in the podcast, but also all the interviews I did the year before last, like this mix of the way sometimes people talk about the joy of doing something or following your heart,
Yeah.
and how often suffering seems to be not the fuel, but at least the kickstarter to the process.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you listen, like, I'm a big fan of Carl Jung, and that was really quite like reading a lot of his stuff or work from different Jungian analysts was very give me a lot of resource to actually help me through that period of suffering. Talking about like what your soul wants. Is your soul actually nourished in what you're doing? Um, for me, largely that answer was no within the setting that I was in, and it first started just by me writing down in a journal. I started building that practice and allowing myself first to express myself free of judgment there, and then it turned into a much larger like self exploration, where it's like, okay, who is Jonny outside of work? Who is Jonny that isn't the career focused person? You know, what else is there? And I think that's the beautiful part of acting, because you mentioned that I played different characters, um, but there's a series of different characters in all of us, and the question is, are you do you allow yourself to play those different characters, or are you stuck in one?
I really like this sense, and yeah, I think there's a number of characters in me. How
Mm.
so when we think of this, right, and even when people talk about authenticity and being yourself, I think there's almost this idea that there's like this one fixed part, or there's this fixed form of you, but really, I think it's giving voice to so many of the different parts within us,
Hmm.
and I think like it's almost allowing for the complexity of yourself to emerge.
Yeah, definitely. I think that each one of us is beautifully complex, and we are all kind of a product of not only our environment, but like our backgrounds, our cultures, our the environment, the life experiences that we've been through, and that gives us like a unique perspectives, and also like different strengths and talents. And the question is like, you can't show all those things. I believe anyway, you can't show all those things just with one expression of self. All of those experiences, your backgrounds give us multiple expressions of self. And I think that once you realize that we are all, the same but also different, then that becomes a very liberating space for you to be something different as well.
And with the, just when you mentioned the almost the start of it, coming in journaling, that's a similar process for myself as well. Is that like, is your form of journaling, is that just free writing and writing down your thoughts, or was it writing with the deliberate intention?
So I first started journaling when it was something suggested to me by an old therapist or coach, and I kind of went with a structure. So I had a few questions that I went with back then, but then slowly I felt like somehow restricted by those questions, and yeah, just became the same over time. So it just became something that was free flowing, and but I didn't really think about it. I just would say, okay, what's coming up for me? And sometimes it was words, sometimes it was like just like a drawing, or like there's some
Yeah, yeah.
pages where I was in a really dark space and I just literally like tear all over the page, you know what I mean? And it's quite funny when I'm flicking through, like some days it's, looking back at my journal is quite interesting, because it's like some days are like super poetic and being like, oh, it's, yeah, it's just appreciating the beauty in the everyday moments, and then you get to this page which is totally ruined. You know what I mean?
I cannot relate to that whatsoever, man.
Then I'm on my own.
My shit was always just poetic.
Okay.
Oh man, it's so true. But
Yeah.
but I think this brings such a lovely. I think what I found really beneficial with the journaling part was just how it could bring you to almost like to meet yourself. Like, like this is part, like this exists within me. Like,
Yeah.
the days where I might just have like an expletive written down in bold bold
Yeah.
caps lock letters or something on a page, or something where you're just starting to like engage with some of, and seeing the full spectrum again, like between something like maybe quite dark, and then, as you say, something quite maybe even to the opposite and creative or poetic.
Yeah.
But I think it's such a lovely tool for just even coming into a little bit more reality, like meeting the reality of yourself, and then also eventually a little bit more acceptance of that in yourself, and then ultimately yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think we all grew up in certain situations, be it in the family home or within our culture, that restricts certain parts of us. That says certain parts of you are not allowed in. You're not allowed to be this way, right? And that that has an impact on us. That conditions us to be a certain way in the world. And I know that for myself. Like, I grew up in Belfast, and I was my friends group. I was probably one of the only people of color there. So a lot of that meant that there were certain parts of my home was bicultural. My dad's from Senegal, my mum's Irish, but then there were a lot of like culture references and a whole part of me that didn't really find resonance outside of my home. So that kind of meant that there were certain parts of me that just didn't find expression. And sometimes I think to myself, that's probably why I do have this creative push, or this push to journal, or just generally to express myself to a greater degree, because of that conditioning. And I think each one of us has that. And the question is, are we willing to look at it and work through it and start to understand that we're not our conditioning, but we're something much larger than that. We can be so many different. Yeah, there's so many different ways of being in the world, and the question is, are we willing to explore that?
So not trying to make too kind of simple an assumption, but do you think your push to be creative now is born out of the conditioning or the container that you felt you were in for not expressing some of yourself while growing up in Belfast?
This is the story I've landed on. Yeah, I think so.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, that's it. We all have stories, the reasons why we're able to operate in the world, and um, I think that's what kind of works for me. It could just be something which is totally within my nature, I guess. Without getting into the whole nature versus nurture thing, but I do believe that there was, and if you look at some of my comedy sketches, a lot of them are based on the fact that I'm someone I'm mixed race. So, and actually navigating that in like a white environment, for example, a lot of the times that I was in organizations, they were like majority white spaces. And sometimes you face a lot of microaggressions or things that people say. And then it's always the question, do you want to call them out for fear of being pushed out of the group, or do you have to just take it? And I think a lot of part of growing up within a majority like white world, at least the environment I was in, meant that there were certain parts of me that I had to like disavow, and then my process of growth has been about reclaiming that and understanding, okay, that is part of me. I am allowed to be this way. I am allowed to express myself in this way or have this belief, for example. So yeah, I've kind of gone round about way, but
tell
that's
me,
what it is.
How would you kind of describe then the process of reclaiming yourself?
It's an introspective one. So it's been quite a messy process. So we talked previously about how, finding your own path. There's no clear set path. You have to make it yourself. It's only once you're down there, you look back and you say, okay, there was a path there.
Yeah.
But I think it's the same for reclaiming yourself. There's no path. You just know deep down in yourself that something is off. You're misaligned in some way. And then you just have to kind of lean into that and say, okay, what is this pain that I'm feeling? And what does it mean? What is it that my body's trying to tell me through this misalignment? And in terms of how that takes shape in the outer world, that might be going to therapy. It might be getting a coach. It's listening to music. It's journaling. For me, it was so many different things, so many things that allowed me to learn more about myself. And I think through those experiences, you become more open to yourself. And then but then a path starts to show itself. You start to trust yourself more and back yourself. And then you just keep going step after step after step. And yeah, and I think the other point is also like connecting with other people who hold the same identity to you as well. For me, I didn't have that a lot when I was growing up. So I had to basically like lean into that a little bit more and understand a little bit more about my African side, my blackness as well, and meet people who also held that identity so I could learn a bit more about myself. And that was like a really healing process as well.
Well, like when you talk about this idea of existing kind of in white spaces, or I remember when we first met, and I was like, Black in Belfast is like that's.
It sounds like a great movie title, to be honest. It'd probably be my autobiography.
but because I mentioned like in Ireland growing up, I think there was like there was an Asian person and a black dude in my year where it was like that was out of 120 people.
Yeah.
And so I've always just with everything that's come up in the last few years, I've always been kind of thinking, I wonder what other people's experience are like in that situation. The experience of it, like, is that a very isolating thing? Like, what life is hard enough, right? Without feeling, I don't know, separate from something or repressing something, which is just completely out of your realm of control or something. It's not like you're doing something. Do you get what I mean?
No, 100%. And I will say that my experiences, I had a lot of privilege as well. I've become aware of that as I've gone through my life and reflected a lot on it and learnt more. But I think for me it was really a question of belonging. So I think all of us kind of seek some level of belonging in order to, it's a big part of our well-being, to feel safe, right? I think for me, I always was looking for belonging in a group. I was really trying to fit in to a group that was very different to me. So I guess my conditioning was I have to disavow this part of myself in order to fit into this group. And, another story I've kind of landed on is that I think that's what allowed me to be so empathic and be able to connect to people and understand what they need very well, because I needed to do that in order to fit into the group. And that became a talent of mine, a superpower on my side that has found its way into coaching. But yeah, I think it's a search for belonging. And the tough part of that is that you never really feel you belong. You're always reminded that you're different.
Fucking hell, man. It's sometimes when I think of just because what you're saying too, I think it's also part of the human experience of, even if we weren't talking about like race here, like this sounds tougher in the sense of this is something explicit that's you're not doing or something like that. So it's just something that's put upon, like it because of other people's maybe perceptions or as you say, microaggressions or something, that it's something that's put upon you. But in other ways, like we're trying to figure out what the group wants from us, right? And then almost at the cost of being ourselves, or tucking a little bit of me in on this range, or maybe I'll be a little bit quieter here, or maybe I won't voice my opinion in this setting here, when you're being sensitive to the group or what the group is wanting or demanding of us. And it is, as you say, a power. But then I think, like with everything, there's some sort of gain and loss, right? Like the more attuned you become to what the group wants, then what about Jonny? Like, do you know what I mean? Which is, and I think 100%. When we look at just people in general on a wider level, I think that dynamic is happening a lot in other forms of or experiences of just being human as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's the kind of the deeper human level of whatever ism that exists, right? It's about inclusion and exclusion, right? And when you're young in an early part of your life, whatever marginalized identity that you hold, the understanding when you're young is that if you are excluded from a certain group, it's almost like a death of kinds, right? And if you think about that, for humans forever have been seeking belonging in a group for the sake of security. Like we're hardwired to do that. So when you think about a marginalized identity, whatever that is, and then being excluded from a certain group, that has a really bad impact on someone's mental health and stops them, disconnects them actually from themselves, and then makes it much more difficult to intuit, to find their own sense of intuition, to connect with their own sense of self, to be able to live a certain life with conviction and go forward in a way that is really nourishing to themselves. So I think there is like a human level, but the most absurd thing I think is when you look back into history and you see how many stories have been withheld about a certain identity that you have, or haven't been given, mainstream media light because they've been suppressed almost on a collective level. Like, no, we're not, gay, and no, we don't like black people, or whatever it is, right? That has a huge impact on how people from those identities can operate in the world. And I think one of the biggest problems when it comes to doing this anti-racist work, or the work of anti-racism, is the fact that it's so deeply ingrained in people's minds on a subconscious level. And there's so much shame associated with it, right? That it becomes a very, very difficult topic to address and to speak about openly. And I think it requires a very high level of skill to open up the space, to open up a new container where people can talk about these things and their own personal experiences of it. And I really do believe that it's really if we can create a space that is safe enough where people can speak about their human experiences, their own personal experiences of whatever ism that they faced, then we can create like true connection. We can really create a better understanding of what this is and really try and eradicate it in the long run. I hope.
Yeah, man, it's super interesting because what you're saying, I think, what you're saying it requires is a level of honesty and reflection, which I don't see in general in society. Like, even if you think of like and I'm not going to shift subjects here. I'm just using analogies. But like, if you think of a politician that's been caught doing something, or if a company leader has been caught doing something, it'll be deny until there's kind of irrefutable evidence, and then go, okay, here's what happened. And then I think the nuances of what you're talking about here that people don't want to admit in themselves, because very rarely do people want to reflect on their own behavior and say, oh shit, I was the bad guy. Like in this story, I was the one at fault. I was the one that erred. And then I think there's also this, in my limited understanding of this at times, right? Like, I think what you said there, the most interesting part is almost the stories. What story do you attach to somebody else, like somebody of difference from you? Like, what's the narrative that you have? So, because I think there's a huge amount of bullshit when people say, I don't even notice color, or I don't even notice someone's
I've heard
sexuality.
that
Like,
1,000 times.
like what like that's not helpful at all. Like,
No.
you're just pleading ignorance.
But it also
there's
it also does the opposite. It also can create more harm because you're actually, you're gaslighting the person. You're not acknowledging them or seeing them for who they are, right?
Yeah. And then within that though, like, we know from research, like, that when you see someone that you consider as different, and we laughed, and I don't know if this statistic is correct since I talked to you. I never checked it up again, but it's something like we share 99% of our DNA with chimps, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that we're looking at points of difference within humans, it's we do it though, right? Like, we just do it. Like, our amygdala flares up if we see somebody that we consider to be different from us.
Yeah.
And this is happening. So then it's not the fact that you don't feel something different. It's almost then, I think, like, what stories do you associate with that? And what do you do then to consciously unravel some of these stories? And, I even see it even in conversations I have, even with my wife, if we talk about sexism or something like this. And I still have to see tons of shit where, although I think that maybe I've got semi-evolved views, like, I still have a long way to go in letting go of certain assumptions or things that I
Don't we
perceive
all?
straight off the bat. Yeah, absolutely. And then even with race, or even with a country, like, there's tons of things that will pop into my head that I know aren't accurate. Like, but if we're not even aware that society hasn't been, as you say, like, kind of been telling a fair story, like, we have no chance of kind of, and I don't know how I feel about, like, the idea if someone has, I don't know, an unconscious bias or bias, and I'd like to get your views on this, but whether that, if that automatically equates to racism, or they're a racist, if you get me, or like, what action someone takes from it, because I think we all literally look at different people with some degree of, like, instantaneous reaction. But I think the way I see it changing in my life is, like, do I know people from lots of different, like, whatever you want to call it, different, whether it's genders or race, religion, whatever. Do I know people from these places? Like, do I know people that are considered different to me in the classic buckets of difference or identity that we describe? And then I think there's nothing more powerful for shifting any narratives inside of me when I know different people.
Yeah, no, and I think my biggest fear would be for people who sort of look like me, almost just to remain just on billboards, and then there's no systemic actual change. There's no change to equity in society. There's no change to access to opportunities, right? Or mindsets. You mentioned about bias as well. So, like, I think obviously you asked me, if I see that as a racist or racism. And I think, like, for me, it depends on who's giving the label, right? My view generally is that we all, based on our conditioning, so, our early childhood environment, our society, right, our different life experiences, we develop like a lens through which we see reality. Let's imagine it's subjective, right? But that lens enables us to see certain things and not see other things, right? And I think, like, for me, having faced racism like all my life, and I would, through that lens, I would get very, very angry when racism would happen. Like, even if I saw it on the internet or something like that, I get really, really angry because of my own pain. And the difference is, the real change happens, the real growth happens when we look at that lens through which we see reality and we start to deconstruct it and say, okay, this story that I have that's given me this belief, does it, like, serve me? What impact is it having on me and my way of operating in the world? And is it mine? Or have I inherited it from maybe a parent or the culture that I was brought up in? And then it's a process of, like, saying, okay, well, if that's the case, if it doesn't serve me, then maybe it's time to let it go. One of my good friends and mentors, he told me a really interesting thing is what he does with his clients is that he gets them to write down these stories on a piece of paper, and then he takes them through like a ritual where he actually burns the stories that they're choosing to let go, which I thought was really, really powerful. But so, and it's really when you kind of address the pain in yourself and what it means to you and really try to heal from that, it allows you to operate in a totally different way when you're faced with racism in the future. So I think the work of, and I guess in a sense, why we're here is to grow and learn. But what I mean by that is to really to deconstruct the lens through which we see society, how it constrains us, how it also enables us, and then try to say, okay, how might I reconstruct my lens in a way that allows me to live a more purposeful life, or allows me to tackle these issues like racism in a way that is less harmful and more productive. So I think that's the self piece, but that's not to take anything away from the fact that, systemic racism has real impacts and stuff. It's just how I've dealt with racism. I've I've gone through a process where I've kind of introspected, understood my history around it, and understand what beliefs that inputted into my mind and my being, and then try to work from there. And that's enabled me to kind of talk more openly about my experiences with that, and as such, allowed allowed other people to understand that they're not the only ones going through it. To learn, hopefully, from that perspective. And hopefully my goal is that they, change their minds or reevaluate what biases they might have around race.
Yeah, I think it's a very humbling process for myself, anyone, I think, to go through like the stories that you're holding at different times, and like whether it's different flashpoints in society where you're just like, fuck, I've never even looked at this. I've never even felt like I've looked at this, and this is what I'm holding. These are assumptions that I make. I don't know, like I think it goes with so many things in life, even as I say, outside of certain identity stuff, where it's just views in general in life. Like where has that come from? Have I ever deconstructed that?
Yeah,
Have I ever challenged my own views? Like, have I where has this come from?
yeah,
And as I say, it can be like a very I don't know. I think it can be quite a shameful process too.
absolutely.
And then like a I don't know, like an ignorance to it too, and just of like, if something has never been my experience at all, to just never even look at it. Like, then the shame almost of like, oh fuck, I've never even tried to look at the world through your eyes. Like, and whereas I may pride myself on doing that in other situations, but having realized that there's some like glaring blind spots where I just didn't even, not even considering things a problem. Do you know what I mean? Like, which is wild. Like,
definitely, and that's the case also with me. You know, living in Berlin, I'm constantly confronted with difference, but a beautiful difference. You know, there's so many people here who have totally different life experiences than what I would have had maybe where I grew up in Belfast, and that's been a constant teacher for me. You know, if you can make yourself open and really not assign judgment, but just be totally present and compassionate to someone who's very different to you, it's amazing how they will, you know, if you create that safe space, how they'll open up and feel comfortable to share with you. And you can learn so much from that, so much. And you start to realize like, whoa, I didn't really know anything about that particular experience of a person with that identity, let's say. So
yeah. But I love what you're talking about, though, in terms of what some of your focuses are coming out of this, like this idea of, you know, connecting with others, sharing your story, or, you know, sharing your ideas, sharing your stories to help other people feel more connected with themselves, with others. Like there's like I'm not trying to silver line something, but it does seem like the arc of so many people I've talked to is suffering occurs, and then, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of kickstarts the process to either expressing something, discovering something, connecting with others. I don't know, whatever the circumstances. I'm not saying that that's always a choice. Like, certain people's life situation won't give them the space to reflect. You know, so I wouldn't even say it's ignorance if somebody doesn't go through this process. It's just like some of us are, as you mentioned, kind of privileged enough to have the space to even to contemplate anything.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you know,
100%. And I think that, you know, even the people who, when you're faced with, you know, I can only speak for racism myself, but, you know, when you're confronted with that, there's a moment of rage that you go through. And I know, for example, I was I worked at a company where I faced like racism, and it's crazy the impact that it has on you. Like, especially in an environment where, you know, there's stakes. You know, your job's on the line, so you can't go absolutely nuts and just go, well, like in most settings. But, you know, you can't get super angry, right? And I know that, like, there's a lot of rage that comes with it as well, right? And often when that's not expressed, where does that rage go? It stays inside. And I think there's a Jungian analyst, James Hollis. I think we talked about him before, but I remember one thing in his book that he said, which was like, depression is rage turned inwards.
yes.
And that makes total sense to me, because it's like when there's an energy to be expressed, to be put out into the world, and that energy can't go anywhere, it will just like press everything down inside. And yeah, the impacts of that are real, and no one sees that, because someone might be depressed at home, going through their own experience, and that was the case for me. I was completely broken after it, and as a result, I sort of got to this point where I was like, no, I'm not going to continue to take this. I'm going to express this. I'm going to find my own way to do it, you know, and that's been a beautiful process. I've been able to speak about it more clearly, and share it with others, and understand that, like, there's great power in that, about sharing honestly the personal, the human experience of racism. But I know that that's not a possibility for everyone, you know.
Jeez, man, I felt that when you said just like rage, like, and just the, you know, the rage, then almost, if it's contained, almost creating this like literal like
Yeah, just
depression with like, and that sounds fucking brutal. Like, in terms of, like, not only does the rage not to get a chance to be expressed, but then it doubles down on the situation where then there's like the pain you're experiencing is compounded.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
No, definitely. And if you add different, I mean, even if we look at other people who, there's different intersections there. So maybe they're also carrying, maybe they might be queer, or maybe they might come from a background where they didn't have a lot of money, for example. They had a lot of financial challenges growing up. Like, all these things compound on top of each other. And subsequently, it then makes it even more difficult for someone who's holding like a more dominant identity or more privileged identity to fully understand the layers to it and how that adds the complexity. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
when no one understands you, when no one outside understands you, then suddenly you're alone. Yeah.
Which I think, man, I think one thing I'd love to see is like, just because what deeply resonates or impacts me is just when I hear people's personal experiences. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's not there doesn't, it feels like to me, and it could be a laziness of me not seeking out, like, apart from people that I meet in my personal life, but I don't go seeking out stories online, I guess. But like, there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of humanity to it. It ends up descending into political discussion and rights and wrongs, where, I don't know, it's just, there's something so deeply impactful, I think, about just hearing how someone felt in a moment. Like, even just an isolated moment rather than a whole idea or theory or whatever behind it, just like, how the fuck did you feel? Like,
Yeah, definitely. That's because it connects us to our common humanity. And I think, that's something that's much more foundational than politics or, our beliefs or views. It's like, this is my human experience. And I understand that that's, vulnerable, and not everyone wants to share that way. But like, for me, that's how I see it. And that's what I see as the best way to kind of really open people's, not only their minds, but also their hearts to what it is. And that's why I think storytelling's so effective. That's such an effective tool at doing that. And that's why I want to continue to do writing and screenwriting in that direction.
And what's that process been like for you? Like, even from not just from a creative experience, but I guess cathartic and create, like, a cathartic experience and a creative experience often go hand in hand anyway with whatever anyone's experiencing. But just in that sense as well, what's this process been like for you?
It's interesting you say that, because I'm just thinking about it now, and I get a smile on my face, because it's, when you're writing from a place of your own personal experience, there's an element of it where you're almost writing from, like, to heal, in a sense. You're committed to confronting this thing that happened to you, and your story around it, right? And I've been writing with a good friend of mine who's a writer, and we've started to know, like, even though we've known each other for like what almost 30 years, actually. So since we were very, very young, we're learning more about each other through this process. And I think that's very, very powerful, because not only are you giving voice to your experience, but you're inviting the other person in on the journey. And what's been really interesting, he's white, and he also grew up in Northern Ireland. When I learned about his perception, like, he had no idea that this was a thing for me. Like, he had no idea that, like, the inner experience of what it was being someone from a completely different culture. We're learning a lot from each other just doing that. So yeah, the process has been really, really nourishing, and yeah, we'll see what comes of it.
When you mentioned a beautiful expression earlier before we were chatting, and I even wrote it down. There's a creative part of me that isn't getting light. What part of you do you perceive to be getting light at this point through these creative endeavors?
I think maybe a part that has been in shadow for quite a long time. So probably part of me that hasn't in the past been brave enough to express myself in that way, openly and honestly, with all the kind of the messy or shameful bits included. And if I could kind of label that expression, it would almost be the artist, because he's kind of a little bit chaotic, but he's experimental and playful, and that was something that I didn't allow myself to do when I was, when I was working in corporate companies. But now what's great is that I can bring that artist, that person who expresses himself, into the work that I do, to create like much more playful and hopefully more engaging, like workshops and training experiences. So yeah, and so I think it's a part of me that I never really gave light to, was the artist. And yeah, I'm not sure how to describe it, but then like marrying that and allowing that space and light in the real world, in what I do currently.
Yeah. This another expression you used, which I really like, is this, and I think this is such a nice kind of way to phrase it for anyone, irrespective of their experience in life, but just trying to reclaim oneself, like just going through life, whether it's making concessions in how we present ourselves, whether it's making concessions in what we think the group needs, whatever it may be. There's this really beautiful process where the more we start to reclaim of ourselves, the more, I don't know, the more peace I think we can have in life, irrespective of outcome.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it frees you as well from that set outcome. It allows you to reconsider what a successful outcome is. As I said before, all of us disavow parts of ourselves in order to belong, in order to fit in order to survive. And to me, the beautiful process really begins with reclaiming those broken shards almost of ourselves, and piecing them back together. And it's going to be like a mosaic, right? It's not going to be the perfect image, right? But it's going to be bits here, bits there, and they're molded together. But you step back and you say, "That's beautiful." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
Like that's I don't know. For me, that's what it's about. It's really about growth, and this just constantly being open to this evolving self, and what's coming through you, and kind of allowing it to go into your work, to go into your home life. That's for me what it's about.
I really like this idea of shards glued back together. It almost kind of simultaneously represents there's a collective fragmentation or something of everything. Like it's all together, yet it's all like there are still kind of separate parts that need going back to your the idea when I first asked you like what question you're trying to answer as you move through life, and it's kind of like, how do I nourish the different parts of myself? Knowing that there are almost these very specific parts of us that need attention, or that need focus, and that even if everything else is kind of looks quite balanced on the surface, if one has dropped out of kind of our focus of attention completely, that it will still create pain points in what looks like quite a comfortable or well put together life. Like something will need expression.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you said about like paying attention to something and having enough focus on it. I think when I first started, like, I guess, a larger period of introspection in my life, I really was sort of still coming with that mindset of like productivity and efficiency. And I, kind of really trying to analyze myself really heavily so that I could get myself to a better space. But I realized that the process was much more about letting go and just committing to having a certain level of self-compassion where you can open, where certain doors can open to you. You can explore them. It's not really, there's a late poet, actually, an Irish poet called John O'Donoghue.
Right.
He's definitely a poet. He was multiple other things, but he has some really, really great work, which I drew a lot of strength from. There's a book called Anam Chara.
Yeah. I have this book. Yeah.
Do you know? Have you read it as well? It's fantastic.
Yeah. I haven't read it all. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I'd love to have said, I've read it all, but I've got about through a fifth of it, I think. Yeah.
I realized I put you on the spot there a little bit, but
no.
Have you read it? No. No, like I'm trying to think what I'm getting back to again, but I took a lot of strength from his work. But he said, it's not really about shining the harsh light of analysis on oneself. It's more just having a gentle attention to oneself, and a questioning of what's coming through here. And that's really what's going to allow you, if you're open to that, the whatever's coming out from within you will express itself, and your job is just to almost get out of the way and allow it to come through. Yeah, so I think that's those fragmented pieces. We've got to kind of pick them up and allow themselves to find their own space together, and then something else comes out. Like, and another thing I'll put in here as well. An old family friend of mine, she was an actress. She is an actress, and I remember asking her, being like, "Yeah, I want to maybe explore acting." And she was like, "Okay." And I said, "Yeah, but I want to figure out who I am first." And she just said, "I hope you never find out." I was like, wait, what is she saying to me? Like, I couldn't believe it. I was so shocked. I was totally dumbfounded. And she said, because the journey of finding that out is what makes life interesting, and one of those moments where you just can't process what she's just said. And then she says, well, think about it. Like, if you knew exactly who you were, then your life would never be different. You wouldn't experiment. You wouldn't try things out, and I realized that there is no clear answer or stick answer for like who you are, because we are human beings. We're always evolving. We're always changing. Now the question is, do you have enough courage? Do you have enough compassion to allow whatever that change is to come through and find expression? There is no, as you said earlier, this idea of one authentic self. There is no one concept of that, right? Because it's always changing. The question is, can you be open enough and receptive enough for those different versions to come through you?
Oh, dude, there's so many nice kind of things within this idea of just giving things attention, not this like fixation on productivity or outcome, and just almost giving yourself permission, or just having that kind of soft awareness around what you are or what needs to come up or what your needs are, and just allowing it. And then I love this. I hope you never find out. That's, I could just imagine that like hitting, if that was said to me, just almost like stopping me dead in my tracks, because it's like such a, it is such a. I think this is the thing, right? Like life is this constantly evolving thing. We are this constantly evolving actor within a constantly evolving environment, and just to be okay with that, and to know that, like, a bit like going back to the mosaic of it being fragmented and whole, like there's something about it, like, where there's all these different pieces that are all, and they're all evolving and then shifting, and their needs shift as well. And trying to just, I don't know, just trying to allow this process to form. I think what you just said there was absolutely beautiful. That sequence of reflections. Look, Jonny, given the time we're at here, and the question that I always ask my guests of what is a good life for you, I know you've touched on like so many interesting things, like trusting yourself, connecting with others, play, creativity, growing, learning, but then this kind of like compassion, self-compassion, self-awareness for yourself, and nourishing different sides of yourself. All of these kind of really lovely ideas that would contribute to one's good life. But if I were to ask you one final time for yourself, what is it? What is a good life for you? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I think it's great that you give me a recap there, because I think for me, at least how I would answer that question today, is, for me, it's all about expression right now. It's about being able to express in my work, in my creative projects and endeavors, parts of myself, and that's something that I'm still navigating with and trying to find out. It's a constant exploration, and I'm still faced with parts of myself that are trying to pull me back, saying, no, this is dangerous, or you don't want to do that. People might judge you. So I think for me, it's about living true to yourself and being able to express what your experience was, tell those stories, because they're all valid, no matter where they're from. They're all valid, and you always don't know whether there's someone out there who is looking for that story, right? To find resonance in their own experience. So I think a good life for me is really about self-expression. And the old me probably would have said, what are you saying? But living out of a place of love, right? But that seems very relevant for me now, as I've just become a new father. Well, 5 months old. But just allowing that, living authentically there is also important, but just living from a place of love for the others around you and for yourself. And I think the world will just open up to you that way. I'm still now, there's still part of me that's cringing after I've said that. I'm just noticing that there. but I mean it, I mean it.
Yeah. No. And I appreciate it. And I felt it as genuine as well, man. I think I often have this experience of what me 6 or 7 years ago, or 8 or 9 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, what they would have said to what I'm saying now. And I don't think I would have listened to myself, quite frankly. So that's always a nice transition to go through.
Yeah, but exactly. It's a sign that we're growing.
So much of what you say, hopefully. So much, man, of what you're saying there resonates with me as well. And I just think the importance, just for anyone listening too, it's not about this idea that you have to make a reckless choice or decision. It can be incremental ways of just starting to express a little bit more yourself, and then just seeing what takes over, or seeing, whereas you've touched on a few times, like where there's energy, where there's movement, and that can kind of propel you as well. Or even if it's noticing it in the other way of just you're feeling suffering or a bit of pain because of a lack of self-expression, like that can be an equally important indicator as well, that perhaps something in us needs to be expressed. And I think you've captured that beautifully through the course of this conversation, Jonny. And thank you very much for your time and for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast, man. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate getting to talk to you and exploring these topics as well. Thank you for the space.